The sign above the departure gate blurred a little. I blamed it on the lighting. I had my carry-on at my feet, my boarding pass folded in the front pocket of my jacket, and a coffee going cold in my hand. Date 14. Halifax Stanfield. Our flight to Cancun was boarding in 40 minutes. I'd been sitting in that plastic chair since 7:15 in the morning, watching families wheel their luggage past, kids dragging stuffed animals, couples arguing quietly over who had the passports. Normal stuff. Airport stuff. My son had told me to meet here at 8. It was 9:10. I called him. Voicemail. I texted. Read receipt, no reply. I walked the terminal twice, checked the Air Transat counter, asked a woman at the information desk if there were delays on inbound flights from Toronto. There weren't. I went back to gate 14 and sat down again. At 9:22, my phone buzzed. Dad, sorry. We decided to leave earlier, catch the 6 a.m. out of Toronto. We're already boarding in Cancun. Have a good week. I read it 3 times. I sat very still and read it 3 more. They had booked a connecting flight from Toronto, a flight I didn't know about, a flight they'd planned without telling me, so they could be on the ground in Mexico before I even finished my coffee in Halifax. The tickets I'd purchased for all 4 of us were still in my pocket. 3 of them, my son, his wife, their daughter. I had paid for those tickets in January. I had paid for the all-inclusive resort in Playa del Carmen. I had paid for the travel insurance, the checked bags, the airport parking. My son had said it would be a family trip, the first one since his mother passed. I folded the boarding passes in half and put them back in my pocket. I picked up my carry-on. I walked to the Air Transat counter and asked if there was any chance of a refund, given the circumstances. The agent, a young woman with reading glasses on a chain, looked at me with an expression I recognized. Not pity exactly. Something quieter than that. She said she was sorry, but the tickets were non-refundable. I thanked her and walked away. Outside, the cab line was short. I gave the driver my address, a house on the South Shore I'd owned for 31 years, and watched the airport disappear behind us. The fog was still sitting on the water. The highway was quiet. I don't remember what the radio was playing. What I kept thinking about, the whole drive home, was a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. It was a Thursday, about 2 weeks before the trip. I had driven over to their place in Dartmouth, my son's house, which I had co-signed the mortgage on 4 years earlier when the bank wouldn't approve him a loan, to drop off a birthday card for my granddaughter. I let myself in with the spare key they'd given me. I could hear them in the kitchen before I reached the hallway. My daughter-in-law was speaking, not loudly but clearly. She had a voice that carried. She said she was sick of always including me. She said every family vacation, every Christmas, every long weekend, it was always my dad this and my dad that. And couldn't they just have something for themselves, for once? She said I was fine, I was harmless, but I was always there, and she was tired of it. She said the Cancun trip was supposed to be the 3 of them. Her words exactly, the 3 of us, just us, without your father hovering. My son said something I couldn't make out. She cut him off. She said, "He's paying for it anyway. What does it matter if we use the reservation or not? He can stay home. Tell him there was a mix-up with the dates." I backed out of that hallway the same way I came in. I set the birthday card on the front step, got in my car, and drove home. I didn't say anything about it. Not for 2 weeks. I answered their calls, had my son over for dinner once, helped my granddaughter with a school project over FaceTime. I acted like I hadn't heard a thing. But I had heard everything. My wife Elaine, God rest her, used to say I was too patient. She said it like it was a complaint, but I think she meant it as a compliment mostly. She used to say, "Harold, you let people take advantage of that patience." She wasn't wrong. After 41 years of working as an estimator for a construction firm, retiring, watching my savings grow, I had more than enough to be generous. I liked being generous. I liked that my son didn't have to struggle the way I did at his age. I liked that my granddaughter could take skating lessons, and my daughter-in-law could go back to school when she wanted to. I paid for things quietly and didn't keep a running tally. I understand now that they mistook my silence for permission. The morning after I got the text at the airport, I made myself breakfast. Eggs, toast, a pot of proper coffee. I sat at the kitchen table where Elaine and I used to sit on Saturday mornings, and I looked out at the backyard. The birch tree she planted the year we moved in was already starting to bud. I decided I was done being patient. My first call was to my bank. I have a financial advisor I've worked with for 15 years. A steady man named Phil who has gray in his beard now and remembers when my son was in high school. I told Phil what I needed. He didn't ask questions, which I appreciated. I had added my son to one of my accounts years ago, a household account I'd set up to make it easy to transfer money for the grandkids' groceries when they needed it, that kind of thing. I had Phil remove him from that account. Then I transferred everything out of it anyway, just to be thorough. My second call was to the mortgage broker who had handled the cosign on my son's house. This took longer. The short version is that when you cosign a mortgage, you can't simply remove yourself without the other party refinancing, but you can write a letter formally requesting removal and making clear you will no longer be responsible for any future obligations. I wrote that letter the same afternoon, had it notarized at a place in Bridgewater, and sent it by registered mail. My third call was to my lawyer. He and I had updated my will when Elaine passed, about 3 years ago. At the time, I had left everything to my son. The house, the savings accounts, the RRSP, the workshop full of tools he'd always admired. My lawyer is a careful woman who asks good questions. She asked me if this was a decision I was making out of grief or anger. I told her I was not grieving, and I was not angry. I was clear-headed. I was 64 years old, and I had been made a fool of, and I wanted my affairs to reflect my actual wishes. We updated the will. The bulk of the estate would now go into a trust for my granddaughter, accessible when she turned 25. A portion to my sister's family out in Victoria. The house on the South Shore, if I chose to sell it. The proceeds would go to a building trades scholarship fund at the local college, something Elaine and I had talked about for years. I left my son a watch. His grandfather's watch, which I had always told him would be his. He could have that. I'm not cruel. The week they were in Cancún, I did something I hadn't done in 11 years. I called my old colleague Dennis. We'd worked together at the same firm for 20 years before he retired to Prince Edward Island, and I told him I had a free week and a long-standing invitation I'd never taken him up on. He said, "Get on the ferry." So I did. I drove to Caribou, clocked the Confederation Bridge, and spent 6 days at his place near Charlottetown. We went ocean fishing. We ate lobster 2 nights in a row. We drove out to the Red Cliffs at Cavendish and just sat there watching the water. Dennis's wife fed me like I was recovering from something, which maybe I was. I didn't look at my phone much. When I did, there were no messages from my son. No calls, no check-ins. Nothing. That told me what I needed to know. They came home on a Sunday. I know, because my son texted me a photo of my granddaughter at the airport, tanned, holding a little sombrero they must have bought her, with the caption, "Great trip." She had the best time. No mention of me. No "sorry we missed you, Dad." No "we should talk," just "great trip." I replied, glad she enjoyed it. I left it at that. 3 days later, my son called. He said he'd been trying to reach me on the shared account and couldn't get in. I said I'd made some changes to my finances and that the shared account was closed. He went quiet for a moment. Then he asked if everything was okay. I said everything was fine. He said he just wanted to make sure, because the mortgage payment was coming up and things had been a bit tight that month. I said I understood, and that going forward his mortgage was his responsibility, same as it would be for anyone else. There was a long pause. He said, What are you talking about? I said. I've been helping you with that payment for 3 years, son. I think it's time you managed it on your own. He said something about the trip, started to explain that there had been a scheduling issue, that they hadn't meant for it to happen the way it did. I let him talk. When he finished, I said, I know about the conversation in your kitchen, the one with your wife, 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave. The line was so quiet, I could hear a car pass by outside his house. He started to say my name. I said, I'm not interested in an explanation right now. I need you to know that I heard what was said and that I've made some decisions accordingly. My lawyer has the details. She'll send you a copy of the updated will when it's in order. He said, Dad, come on. I said, have a good night. I hung up. He drove out the following Saturday. I saw his car come down the driveway from the kitchen window. I let him knock. I answered the door, offered him coffee, and we sat at the table. The same table where I'd made my decisions the morning after the airport. He looked tired. He'd been crying, I think, or hadn't been sleeping. He kept his hands around his mug. He said he was sorry. He said he should have told me about the change in plans instead of sending a text. He said his wife. And here he stopped and rubbed his face. His wife had pushed for the early flight, and he had let her push, and he knew that wasn't good enough as an explanation. I said, it's not an explanation at all. It's a description of what happened. He nodded. He didn't argue. He asked about the will. I told him I had updated it, that my granddaughter was provided for, and that I hoped he would understand my reasons. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, Did I do something wrong before all this? Did I miss something? It was a good question. Honestly, it was the first good question he'd asked in a while. I told him that he hadn't done one big thing wrong. He'd done 100 small things that added up. He'd borrowed and borrowed without thinking of it as borrowing. He'd accepted help and stopped seeing it as help. It became expected, background, like heat or water. He'd let his wife say things about me in his house that he should have stopped. He'd chosen easy over honest more times than I could count. And I had let him because I was patient, and because he was my son, and because his mother was gone, and I didn't want to make things harder. But she was gone, and my patience had a bottom after all. He cried a little. I won't pretend it was easy to watch. This was my boy. I remembered driving him to hockey practice at 5 in the morning, standing in cold arenas, watching him fall and get up and fall again. I remembered the summer he turned 16 and we built a deck together off the back of this house, just the two of us, and Elaine brought us lemonade and took a photo I still have somewhere. I poured us both more coffee and I said, I'm not disappearing. I'm not cutting you off as a person. But I'm done being taken for granted. That's the difference. He looked up. He asked what it would take. I told him I didn't have a list. I told him this wasn't a negotiation with conditions. I told him what I needed was time and honesty when we did talk, and for his wife to understand that treating me like a nuisance in a house I helped pay for was not something I would accept quietly again. He said he would talk to her. I said, don't talk to her for me. Talk to her for your own sake and for your daughter's. He left around 4. I stood at the window and watched his car go back up the drive and disappear onto the highway. The birch tree in the backyard threw a long shadow across the lawn. The fog had lifted earlier, and the light on the water to the south was the particular gold you only get in Nova Scotia in late spring. I washed the mugs, dried them, hung them on their hooks. I had a quiet dinner. I called Dennis to tell him I'd gotten home safely from PEI, and we talked for an hour about nothing important. Hockey, the price of diesel, a book he'd been reading. I went to bed before 10. I slept better than I had in months. There are things you spend decades building, a house, a reputation, a way of treating people that you hope comes back around. You assume the people closest to you see that. You assume proximity equals understanding, but sometimes the people who benefit most from your steadiness are the last ones to notice it's there. until it isn't. I'm not a bitter man. I want to be clear about that. I'm 64 years old. I have a granddaughter who draws me pictures of horses. I have a good friend on the island who owes me a rematch at cribbage, and I have a house on the South Shore that is entirely mine. I wake up every morning, and the birch tree is still there, and the water is still there, and I still know the difference between what matters and what doesn't. My son calls on Sundays now. We talk. It's still careful, still a little formal in the way that new things sometimes are. But it's real in a way it wasn't before. His wife has not called me. I don't expect her to yet. Maybe someday. My granddaughter sent me a drawing last week. A man standing beside a very tall tree. She wrote my name at the bottom in her big looping letters. I put it on the fridge. That's where the good things go. I keep thinking about that birch tree Elaine planted the year we moved in. 31 years, and it's still standing. It didn't get tall by being coddled. It got tall because the roots went deep enough to hold it through the hard seasons. I used to think that being a good father meant making things easier for my son than they were for me. And for a long time I believed I was doing exactly that. I paid quietly, helped without being asked, filled in the gaps before he even noticed they were there. I told myself that was love, and it was. But somewhere along the way, I stopped asking whether it was doing him any good. What happened at that airport was painful. But looking back now, I think it was also honest in a way that years of smooth dinners and borrowed money never were. It showed me clearly what had grown in the space where I thought I was building something. Not a family that was stronger for my help, a family that had learned to expect it and resent the reminder of where it came from. The hardest thing I've had to sit with is this: I allowed it. Not all at once, not on purpose, but in 100 small moments where I chose easy over honest. Every time I transferred money without a conversation. Every time I let a slight go because I didn't want to make things uncomfortable. Every time I told myself patience was a virtue and used it as an excuse to avoid a hard truth. What I call generosity had, over time, become something that served no one, not him, not me, not my granddaughter who was watching all of it and learning what family looks like. The 3 phone calls I made that week weren't about punishment. I want to be clear on that. They were about finally being honest. With my bank, with my lawyer, with myself. That's the thing about integrity. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly makes itself known when you're sitting alone at a kitchen table at 64, deciding what kind of man you actually are. I think there's something to be said for the kind of strength that doesn't come from anger. My son came to that table in Dartmouth expecting either a fight or a cave-in. What he got was a father who had thought it through, spoken plainly, and wasn't going to be moved. That kind of steadiness, the kind that holds even when it's uncomfortable, is something I had to find in myself before I could offer it to him as an example. I wasn't sure it was still in me. Turns out it was. He calls on Sundays now. We're still finding our way back to something real. I don't know how long that will take, and I'm not going to pretend it doesn't cost something. But I know the difference now between peace that's earned and peace that's just silence. My granddaughter sends me drawings. I put them on the fridge. The roots are still there. So is the tree.